On April the 11th, 1909, a group of 66 families gathered on the sand dunes a few kilometers north from the city of Yafo. Beginning in 1906, it became apparent that Yafo was overcrowded with the surge of those coming to Palestine as part of the Second Aliyah. And Yafo was dirty and crowded and unable to hold all of the new people who had sought to make their lives in the land of Israel. Usually, Yafo was a waypoint through which new pioneers, chalutzim, would make their way to towns with inspiring names like Rishon LeZion, the first to Zion, or Petach Tikva, the opening of hope. But of course, there were those that wanted to stay a little closer to shore. And so through Arthur Rupin, who was the head of the Jewish National Fund and the Zionist leader in Jaffa, they put together some money and bought some dunams of land just north of the city. And so they gathered together 120 or so seashells. Some were gray and some were white. And on the white ones, they wrote the names of each of the individual families, and on the gray ones, they wrote the number of the different parcels that had been allocated as part of this new community that they imagined would be like a garden city moderned on all of the modern nuances they would have wanted to take with them from Europe. And a boy would call out a family name, and a girl would call out a parcel number as they pulled shells out of a box, and such was the birth of Tel Aviv. Today, the metropolitan area of Tel Aviv is home to more than 3.8 million people. Tel Aviv is a center of vibrant life and culture and has recently been named the most expensive real estate on the planet. It is now more expensive to live in Tel Aviv than in San Francisco, though we in Boca are catching up rapidly. We had the privilege of standing on the original street of Tel Aviv just 1 week ago today on Rothschild Boulevard, fashioned after those European cities from which those 66 families had hailed, with the original kiosk where they used to sell coffee and sweets, still selling coffee and sweets. And the city around it has grown remarkably. Originally, Tel Aviv was called Achuzat Bayit. It was called the homestead. But then later they drew from a source from the book of Ecclesiastes, which was the inspiration for the Hebrew translation of Theodor Herzl's book Alt Neuland, Old New Land, the novel that Theodor Herzl had written just before his death, in which he imagined a Jewish utopia that would be built on the shores of the Mediterranean. And so that word, Tel Aviv, is compelling. A tel is a mound or a hill that is fashioned by having one civilization that was ruined become the foundation for the next civilization that was built on top of it. And then the next civilization built on top of that, and then the next civilization built on top of that. So in some ways, a tel is a testament to ancient history. And yet the word Aviv means springtime. And so there was a sense when they were naming this new Jewish city whose streets were laid out in the shape of a menorah, and who deliberately fashioned intersections to not be efficient four-way intersections like you might find at the corner of Palmetto Park Road and Military Trail. They were fashioned as six-way intersections that formed the shape of a Magen David. Because to them, they weren't looking for efficiency, they were looking for spirituality. And so there was this confluence of the ancient and the future, the rebirth and the renewal that came on top of something that had been destroyed. In many ways, it is to see the land of Israel as entirely a tell, even though there are many tells to be found. Because in many ways, the land of Israel is a tell of imagination and hope. Because certainly over the centuries and the millennia, the land of Israel has seen its fair share of birth and newness and building, potential and hope, and also its share of destruction and ways in which the land and its citizens were destroyed and laid to waste. And yet it was from the rubble of what was destroyed that was often the building stones to create that which was new. And if you don't have imagination, if you don't have some sense of a future-minded vision that what comes next will be better than what came before, you can't build. And in this week's Torah portion, Shalach Lacha, that's kind of what happens. The spies are sent to go scout out the land, and they come home after 40 days, and they say, well, we've got good news and bad news. The good news is it's an incredible place. And take a look at its fruit that they grabbed from the Eshkol Valley, which was a cluster of grapes so big it had to be borne on a pole between two people. If you've ever seen the logo for the Ministry of Tourism in Israel, it is from this week's Torah portion that they derive it. On the other hand, they said there's a lot of people that live there, and they have fortified cities, and they're giants. They make us feel like grasshoppers. We should head back to Egypt. And so the Holy One doesn't know what to do. One of the scouts, Caleb, from the tribe of Judah, calls out, hey, shh, let us go up. Ki nuchal bo, we shall surely overcome it. And yet the rest of the spies, the other 10, said, no, we can't. And so the Holy One said, because you lack imagination, because you lack vision, because you cannot see the potentiality of what lies before you, you will not be the generation who will make their way to the promised land. We need a generation that can see that vision, that which is not there, but that is the reality to be built. Imagine you're one of those Israelites, and you've just been told that all the progress you thought you had made. Imagine you were thinking you were on the cusp of arrival in the promised land, and now you're told, no, it's probably not going to be for decades. Imagine what would happen to your soul in that moment. Imagine what it must have been for the Israelites to know they weren't going back to Egypt, but that they certainly weren't going straight to the promised land, that there was going to be a long time wandering in the wilderness. I think there are many people in our country today that can resonate to that sensation, to that sense of worry and concern about what the future will be. There are some who greet the news of today with exultation and joy because their vision of what human life is something that they believe has been under assault for 50 years. And there are many, many others who believe that there has been a turning back of the clock 50 years by what was done today. And we will have to navigate those feelings and the sense of joy for some and anguish for others that this day will represent for many years to come. But if we believe in the sanctity of life, if we believe in the promise of human potential, then we will build a tell. That we will take that which was destroyed before and the common values that we share of the primacy and holiness of human life and use those broken stones to become the cornerstones of a future we will build together, one that will be based on the treasuring of every human life, those that are seeking to come into life and those that will nurture life into being, and those that will seek to build out of the rocky soil in Israel a new, beautiful, holy, vibrant, and diverse and sustaining future. Shabbat Shalom.